World Wrestling Federation. Can anyone stop him? Incredible!
There's a specific je ne sais quoi to 2D arcade wrestling games that 3D games never captured. When the PS1 or the Dreamcast era had 3D wrestlers looking like blocky Legos smashing against each other, the arcades were pushing sprite technology that rendered large, complex characters with smooth and fluid animations. So I've gone through my retro collection and found 15 games that didn't just simulate the sport, they revolutionized what it meant. WWF Wrestle Fest, 1991. One of the heavyweight champions of the genre, Techno's Japan, took what they learned from WWF Superstars and bulked up to make one of the best wrestling games of the decade. The sprites are absolutely massive and detailed, befitting the larger-than-life personas of the golden age of wrestling. Special care was made to avoid video game isms in a strive for more realism. For example, when you wear an opponent down, they don't just flash red. They physically drag their feet, pant for breath, and struggle to stand up. But the real technical innovation here was the Royal Rumble mode. Having 6 massive character sprites on screen at once, with 0 slowdown, puts this cabinet head and shoulders above the others. The one gripe I had with this is that the animations aren't as smooth and can look a bit clunky with the more complex moves. But with all the different body states and actions you can perform, they had to make concessions somewhere. Saturday Night Slam Masters, 1993. This is basically Capcom looking at the wrestling genre and saying, what if we made Street Fighter 2, but in the ring? The first thing you'll notice about this game is the art and animation style, as it's basically our favorite wrestlers drawn into the iconic Street Fighter art style, designed by Tetsuo Hara, the manga artist behind Fist of the North Star. Mechanically, it's way more than a button masher. It utilized a 3-button layout, grab, attack, and jump, and required fighting game motion inputs to pull off special moves. You can't just press a button to perform a pile diver, you need to input a 360-degree motion on the joystick to execute a spinning pile diver. This adds a level of cognitive engagement that makes high-level play so incredibly rewarding. It felt like a true competitive fighter disguised as a wrestling game, bridging the gap between these two arcade genres. WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game, 1995. If Saturday Night Slam Masters was inspired by Street Fighter 2, then Wrestlemania, the arcade game, is clearly inspired by Mortal Kombat. It's clear not just in the digitized actors and not just in the chaotic, brutal combat, but how the game has wrestlers zipping across the arena and shooting out projectiles and glowing with power. So when Bam Bam Bigelow punches you, your character literally catches on fire. It also introduced a combo system where you weren't slowly trading holds. You were juggling opponents in the air with uppercuts and drop kicks. It deconstructed the wrestling genre and rebuilt it as a beat-em-up-esque fighting game. Also, gotta mention the art direction here. The digitized characters and backgrounds are masterfully done, and the handmade sprites have this rendering style that makes the whole thing look like a VHS recording, giving the game a further sense of realism, for lack of a better word. Wrestle War, 1989. Sega's Wrestle War is often forgotten, but graphically, it was so completely different from everything else out there. While most games used a flat, static side-on view, Wrestle War tried something new with oversized sprites and unique camera perspectives. The screen itself in the cabinet is a vertically mounted 16:9 screen, and the effect creates a pseudo 3D 3/4 view that is so technically impressive, and the camera will change perspective. Camera movement you don't even see in modern wrestling games. Another thing that was impressive was the physicality of the controls. It took the term button masher and ran with it. To escape a hold or win a grapple, you had to hammer the buttons as fast as possible. It'll tire out your arm, but it stimulates the struggle of a match perfectly.
Come back, You're gonna pay!
The main event, 1988. The main event is a rare 4-person cabinet, but it's surprisingly small for a 4-person, all the players having to squish against each other to reach the controls, which, now that I think about it, probably added to the competitive atmosphere of playing this. Adding to it is the announcer, who isn't just there for flavor, but is a necessary part of the gameplay because his announcements help clarify the action going on. As the visuals here can, get a bit confusing, as the sprites are small and muddy compared to most games. There's a large variety of moves, as you can do attacks, basic grapples, advanced grapples, aerial moves, and a signature ability. And these don't have their own buttons like with most games, as each player only has a joystick, action, and tag button as their only controls. And with only one action button, you can perform headlocks, slams, backbreakers, atomic drops, pile drivers, and, more. Three-count bout. Fire suplex, 1993. SNK never does anything in half measures, and three-count bout, known as fire suplex in Japan, is proof of that. Released on the Neo Geo, the game looks more advanced than most of the other games on this system. The sprites are huge, colorful, and animated with that signature SNK fluidity. When the characters turn around, they aren't just flipping their X direction as most games do. They have a smooth, high-frame turning animation that, strangely enough, I'd consider to be a cinematic turn. Everything is so detailed. You can see the highly detailed oblique muscles on the characters, and climbing up the ring post to perform a jump, tumble, and drop is a complex multi-stage animation that's so fun to watch. I also love the way the characters walk into the ring at the beginning of each match, with Terry Rogers being my favorite character as his actions are so stylish, especially the way he leaps over the ropes. WWF Superstars, 1989. Before Wrestle Fest perfected the formula, WWF Superstars laid the groundwork. The game featured cutscenes with digitized portraits of Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant delivering promos, complete with text crawl. In 1989, having any kind of narrative context in an arcade game was rare, let alone a specific character dialogue. The gameplay introduced the grapple loop that Technos would become famous for. You can't just punch wildly, you have to lock up, win the power struggle, and then execute a move. It added a unique rhythm to the combat that I enjoyed very much. I also appreciate how we can just straight up play as the famous wrestlers such as Macho Man Randy Savage or Ultimate Warrior, instead of the legally distinct knockoff counterparts. It might not seem like a big deal, but it's quite refreshing when you've played all these original characters from other games. Ring of Destruction, Slam Masters 2, 1994. If the first Slam Masters was a wrestling game with fighting elements, Ring of Destruction is a straight-up fighting game wearing the thin veneer of a wrestling game, and I love it. Running on the same hardware that powered Street Fighter II Turbo, the game is a high-powered, high-speed, and visually impressive juggernaut. The game removed the traditional pinfall mechanic in favor of a health bar depletion equals KO, which I'm not sure how I feel about. Honestly, it was too fighter-y for wrestling fans who wanted simulation, and too wrestler-y for fighting game fans, making it a misunderstood middle child type game. Turning the grappling and overpowering mechanisms of wrestling into a punching and kicking street fight is certainly an interesting move, and one that clearly missed. But it's an implementation of a wrestling game that's interesting and could be tons of fun, especially with more casual fans. Muscle Bomber Duo, Ultimate Team Battle, 1993. This is essentially a version of Slam Masters which swung in the other direction, being more grounded and wrestling focused. It mastered the psychology of tag team wrestling better than anything else. Unlike other games where the partner just stands on the apron waiting, it was designed specifically for 2v2 action, allowing for 4 players to play simultaneously. The advanced aspect here was the team attack system. You could coordinate with your partner to pull off dual suplexes or slingshot maneuvers that required genuine communication. Despite 4 players each mashing buttons with arms and legs swinging and bodies flying, The game ran buttery smooth with no slowdown. This was more key in this game than in others, as perfect timing and coordinating with your partner is essential for winning. This game is probably the best 4-person co-op and competitive cabinet game, and you'll have a lot of laughs and excitement as you manage to pull off complex maneuvers together. Champion Wrestler, 1989. Although it looks like any other wrestling game, Champion Wrestler has a distinct feeling from the WWF clones of the era. Instead of digitized actors or Hulk Hogan lookalikes, we got some more archetypal characters, like a samurai, Conan the Barbarian-like, a tiger luchador, and many more. Characters have a stat screen with the info like height and weight, but also video game stats like power, technique, speed, etc. This gives the character selection more depth, and different characters require different gameplay styles, making this more RPG-like than most sports games. The gameplay is surprisingly technical as it requires spacing and timing. You can't just mash buttons, you gotta perform complex maneuvers with precision. And being able to grab your opponent by the legs, spin them around, and toss them out of the ring, then elbow diving onto them feels so good. I also love the post-match screen where each character has different win and loss portraits that inject a lot of personality and comedy to the game. Mania, Exciting Hour, 1985. If you're old enough to have been in arcades during the 80s, then you've probably seen Mania around. This game is the grandfather of the modern wrestling game. Developed by Technos Japan, the same creators who would later bring us Double Dragon, this game had done away with the multiplayer aspect entirely to focus on a brutal, single-player boss rush experience. You take on the role of a generic wrestler and you have to run a gauntlet against 5 distinctly themed champions to win the title belt. Each opponent had different styles and movesets, and the challenge came with figuring out the best ways to counter each one. Even though it only used 2 buttons, punch and kick, the context-sensitive grappling allowed you to pull off suplexes, pile drivers, and backbreakers. It laid the blueprint for the grapple loop mechanics that would define the genre for the next decade. Mania Challenge, 1986. If Mania was the single-player campaign, Mania Challenge is the multiplayer mode. Technos Japan heard that players wanted a multiplayer version of Mania to play with their friends, and they delivered. Now, this does have a single-player mode, but it's stripped down to just 3 opponents in order to make space for the multiplayer mode. So play Mania if you want the single player. The biggest change between the previous game and this one is the countering techniques, which allow a player to counter almost any move with the right timing. This does turn the match into an intense game of chicken where if any player decides to engage in a move, the other can respond with a counter, so whoever attacks first loses. This can be equal parts frustrating but also fun, as it adds a sort of psychological element to it. You need to anticipate how your opponent would respond. Body Slam, Dump Matsumoto, 1986. While the West was obsessed with Hulk Hogan, Sega created a perfect arcade port for the Japanese women's wrestling fans. Known in Japan as Dump Matsumoto, and in the West as Body Slam, the game is a fascinating, often overlooked gem. It was a rare instance of a game taking a women's sport completely seriously, portraying them as powerful, technical athletes. It's a standard tag team wrestler where one partner fights in the ring while the other waits and cheers from the apron, only running in to assist with pins. The aesthetic here has that unique Japanese charm, slightly caricatured to emphasize facial expressions, but with fluid animation. Dump Matsumoto was a real-life, terrifying heel wrestler, by the way, known for entering the ring with a bamboo sword and inciting riots. I kinda wish they brought that into the game, but I can see why it was impossible to do so with the mid-80s technology. Ring Rage, 1992. Ring Rage is the goofiest game on this list. While Midway went for hyper-realism with their digitized sprites, Taito used digitized actors but applied a strange, almost rotoscope or clay-like animation and rendering to them. The result is a strange and goofy wrestling game that really emphasizes the campy, comedic aspects of wrestling that the other games could not. This extends to the presentation and gameplay as well. The favorite being the grappling cinematic, where upon a successful grapple and overpower, the environment darkens. The camera zooms in on the grappled players, time slows, and a campy but epic reversal or throw occurs, where sprites are sent flying in slow motion, with reaction portraits popping up. It's so much fun and very funny. And of the games on this list, it's one I highly recommend everyone at least try. Tag Team Wrestling, 1983. This is the oldest game on this list, and it shows. But don't let that age get in the way of appreciating the technical and visual art that is this game. I mean, you can tell by how the ring itself is rendered at an insane perspective with a fisheye lens effect. Characters move freely around the ring, and things like grappling are surprisingly readable who's winning despite how low fidelity and low color range these sprites are. Also, when you grapple, a menu pops up for a split second that rapidly cycles through possible next moves, and you have to time the next tap to get the move you want, which keeps the grapples tense and requiring constant focus. Not to mention that getting thrown out of the ring completely changes the background and perspective, turning from a top-down wrestling into a side-scrolling one. Looking back at these 15 titles, it's amazing to see how much innovation was crammed into just one genre. And this one 10-year slice of history. From Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat-like fighters, to complex technical simulators, to cooperative, coordinated multiplayer experiences, this game still deserved to be known and appreciated. And that ends our video. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And I will see you on the next video.